Well, while people are gathering their thoughts for a question, I've got a question for you. At the table here, you were talking about having just been in Finland and a dramatic turnaround in Finland's educational system, and you used the word turnaround, one of the most dramatic in the world. What was the secret?
Well, you know, and we stopped, you said, hey, if we talk about it here, maybe I won't explain it to the table so you won't be bored twice. But, you know, when I found this, no state expense, but I was invited because I'm on the board of the State Superintendents Association to do this international trip. And they had ministers from other countries, Singapore, Mexico, France, and then a couple of us who were called chiefs. By the way, I go to my first so-called chiefs meeting, and they call us chiefs because some are called commissioners, some are called state supes, some are elected statewide. Chris, who's the governor of Florida, was the former state superintendent, you know, so often the elected ones run for higher office. And just as an aside, when I went to my first meeting, I didn't actually think it was that good. And the executive director said, you know, Flanagan's the new chief here, what do you think? And up above me was a banner that had CCSSO, which was Council of Chief State School Officials. And I looked up and I said, you know, I'm just proud to be part of the Kaka Soso Association. They didn't laugh. And I'm serious about this. I think one of the problems we have is we have people that get into positions of authority and then they take themselves so seriously that they get nothing done. Nothing done. And it's scary in terms of a national prospect. But right now we're competing with the rest of them. So I'm actually hoping they all lull themselves to sleep and just do whatever they do, and then Michigan will race right by the other states. But Finland believes, if it gets right down to it, we visited the Nokia executives one night, visited a number of schools, teacher lounges, and what kept coming up over and over and over again is they all use the word nation building. We are nation builders. And I think, Mr. Hallenstein, based on our conversation, your visit to Russia, I think it has something to do with they want to be independent. They don't want to have this history they've had in the past. They also realize there are only 7 million people, and they could be swallowed up, and they don't have really resources anymore. I mean, half their country's in the Arctic Circle. So their thing is brain power. And so to keep ourselves as a nation, we've got to win the brain power. So that's the first part. The second part, when I kept trying to get teachers to tell me, now, how do you deal with accountability? Like, I'm seeing, and probably am a little too strict on accountability. I think all schools need to be held to a standard. One I love right now is called College Ready. We can tell College Ready based on ACT scores, and there are some shocking things. There are some districts that are well thought of in this area that they only have 25% of their kids college ready according to the ACT. The state average is 18. But anyway, so I'm trying to get it, now what are your measures? And what you could see with the teachers is, oh my God, we would be ashamed if the superintendent or the governor or the minister knew this. We fix it ourselves. So what you have is you have a sincere enthusiasm and pride that teachers are not, they are so ashamed if their kids aren't doing well, they're going to do whatever they have to do, day and night. I mean, it's built in. And we have pockets of that. In fact, I did a live interactive with the UP last week, right after I'd come back. And I said, you got a lot of Finns up there, right? You know, I laughed and a bunch of them raised their hands. I said, you need to lead us out of this. Because there's a culture there, and I'm not actually kidding about that. The UP, whenever I visit there, the superintendents are more, they see themselves more as community builders. So translated to me, nation builders, community builders. You know, this is something broader than just reading, writing, and arithmetic, and I hope we can capture it. Yes, sir.
Hi. I guess part of my question has to do with the strange sort of precariousness in your position, having to constantly deal with political flux, and education is obviously kind of a political football. I'm thinking about a $220 cut to, per pupil funding, Michigan Promise Scholarship, federal funds not being available to schools because we don't have a budget set. Obviously, you have a lot of political hurdles right now that hinder you from doing your job. I realize it's probably not an easy answer, but how do you deal with that?
Well, that's a great question. I'll give you an example just that's recent. Brian inferred this. I mean, I'm kind of on the outs right now, not only with, I think the governor is a good person, we just disagree on this issue. but also with some of my board members, because I'm speaking out. I did this morning on Michigan Radio, whatever that Michael Patrick Shields show is, that this isn't a time to be persuaded by people who can make big contributions to you. And that's, in this case, this isn't to pick on the EA, they do a lot of good things, but the EA spends a lot of money on elections, and the MEA, the teachers union, owns the subsidiary of theirs is this insurance company, and trust me, we can save hundreds of millions of dollars as a state if we will pool this. But it's put me at odds. I had 2 board members visit me. I wouldn't even mention this other than this got in the paper, so it's, at least in Southeast Michigan, it's somewhat known. And, you know, if they get enough votes, they'll do me a favor in some ways. You know, I can retire. So to answer your specific question, I think, to me, it has to do with something I find myself trying to say to other people. You almost have to have clarity about what you're willing to be fired for. And if you can get clear in your mind, you know, kind of what that feels like. I appreciated when Brian, you know, of course, being my son saying this, it was very emotional, but to see that it is about mission. And I'm not going to be for higher taxes alone. I do think there's a way to do something with taxes on services, by the way. But I think that can only come if you do it in tandem with cuts. And if you're not willing, for instance, I just don't understand the political lack of will to say we're going to save hundreds of millions of dollars on this insurance pooling. I think you can save another hundreds of millions of dollars on consolidating services. You don't even have to consolidate districts if you don't want, because that's a political football. But at least, when I was a superintendent at Wayne County, we did payroll, personnel, and report cards for 150 districts in the state. We could have done it for all 500 districts in the state, and should have. So when we bought software for $5 million, that should have been it. So I'm really pushing hard right now on the legislature and on the ISD superintendents that you better really push hard to consolidate services and save money, because we don't have the right to ask for new money unless we're talking about really whittling down and getting the economies where we can get them first. But the political, yeah, I mean, it's uncomfortable right now, and maybe fatal. I don't think so. I mean, this little talk we had, I finally thought, you know what, these are 2 of 8 board members, so the next week we had a board meeting, and at the little lunch we have, it's a day-long meeting, at the little lunch, I kind of called the question and said, you know, I don't even need 5 votes, really, to be against me on this. If there's a couple that really think I need to move on, just let me know. But, you know, there's also a little funny thing that tends to happen that, at least did this time. I mean, 2 weeks from now, I've been reading about my firing in the paper, so this may be a little bit premature. But I do think there's really something good in human nature that if people realize you're trying to do the right thing, you may not always agree, you'll probably be allowed to get through this process. I'm absolutely convinced that some of the changes we have made, high school requirements are not an unimportant one. It's forcing every teacher to focus on, you have to get, if it was your kid and they were putting in a weak curriculum that wouldn't make them ready for college, you'd be upset, right? So why should we settle for it for anyone? But that, as Brian said, was a big political hurdle, because people are afraid that they'll look bad when they can't make it happen right away. Well, we can over time. So I'm rambling, I'm sorry I'm rambling a little bit here. But the politics, honestly, I tend to not think about it much. You know, if it, let the chips go where they go. But on this case, I am not going to just be kind of a hired gun, so to speak. I mean, I'm not hired by the special interest, but in a sense, you know, I want to support teachers, I want to support superintendents, but we have to make these economies of scale. There's room for that to happen. Then you wouldn't have to worry about a $218 cut, because it would be taken care of under this other set of changes. But there's, and in terms of the Promise Scholarship, I mean, you know, what the cuts we're making in higher ed, Grand Valley is a perfect example. This is our seed corn for the future. We got to make every other kind of change first before we make them here. And I think that would include the Promise Scholarship, because that's helping a lot of kids get through college that wouldn't otherwise.